Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first YouTube shir. I've chosen as a topic for this evening's shir the Torah's prohibition against the eating of blood. I think we're all aware that the eating or consumption of blood is a major Jewish taboo, even when it comes to permissible animals and birds, sheep, goats, cows, permissible birds. It's only the flesh of the animal which is permissible and not the blood. In fact, we go to great lengths to remove all traces of blood through soaking the meat and then salting the meat. And the question, of course, arises as to why there is so much emphasis on this prohibition. Well, this in fact is discussed in Parshas Achrei. It's the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, verse 10 and 11. As well as other verses in the Torah. But we're going to focus today on what it says in Leviticus in verses 10 and 11. God says that you should say to the children of Israel that you shall not eat blood. And he goes on to explain, Ki nefesh habasar badamhi, because the soul of flesh exists within its blood. V'ani natati v'lachem al mizbeach, and therefore I have asked you to bring blood onto the altar, lechaper al nafsheisechem, to atone for your souls. Ki hadam hu benefesh yechaper, because as blood is associated with the soul, it therefore has the ability to atone for the soul. Or as Rashi explains in his commentary, let one soul atone for the sins of the other soul. Let's explore this at a little more depth. The Ramban, that's Nachmanides, he's a 13th century Spanish scholar, he says that what the Torah means to say over here is that within the animal there is a certain portion which God has given to us, and there's a certain portion which God has kept for himself. What portion has God kept for himself? He's kept for himself the soul. And as the soul is associated with the blood, therefore he has forbidden us to eat the blood because it belongs to him, it's his. The only thing we're allowed to do with the blood is to bring it onto the altar as a sacrifice. Now what's the reason for this? The reason for this is, explains the Ramban, that originally all animals were forbidden to mankind. When Adam and Eve were created, they were not allowed to eat meat. They were only allowed to eat vegetation. It was only after the flood that God permitted Noah and his descendants the eating of meat. Why did it become permissible? So the Torah actually explains, according to the Ramban. The reason is because all animal life owed its existence to Noah. Had Noah not taken them into the ark, they would have perished. And therefore, as a form of gratitude to Noah, they have to allow Noah to eat of their flesh. However, it's only the flesh which is permissible, but not the soul. The soul, even an animal, is its consciousness. An animal knows what's beneficial to him. An animal knows what's harmful for him. It moves towards the things which it enjoys, and it distances itself from the things which are possibly harmful to it. Similarly, also, even dogs have a certain kind of consciousness. That consciousness expresses itself in their loyalty to their owners. Birds, pigeons, are able to know where their home is. So there's a certain amount of consciousness within the animal kingdom. And because human beings also have a consciousness, and it's this consciousness within human beings which leads them to sin, because without that consciousness, without that willpower, no one would sin. So the human being requires atonement for the sins of his consciousness or for the sins of his soul. And God in his great kindness has provided us a surrogate. What is a surrogate? The surrogate is the soul of the animal. As the Ramban explains, there is a certain commonality between the soul of the animal, which is its consciousness, and the soul of the human being, which is its consciousness. And therefore, by bringing the soul of the animal, its blood, onto the altar, one is able to effect an atonement for the soul of the human being. However, as the Ramban explains, it's only permissible to use the consciousness of the animal for the atonement of the soul of the human being, not merely to consume it. It's not correct that one consciousness should eat another consciousness. The meat is all right. The meat doesn't reflect the soul of the animal. However, the blood, which reflects the soul of the animal, is not permissible to be eaten. Because one soul shouldn't be eating another soul. One consciousness should not be eating another consciousness. Therefore, God says that the soul of the animal belongs to me. I may have given you the animal to eat after the flood, but the soul I keep for myself, the blood I've kept for myself. Then the Ramban goes on to give another explanation. He explains that there's a difference between an animal and a human being. An animal is essentially only interested in earthly things. It's interested only in things which are necessary for its survival. The expression is nefesh ha-behema hilamata, ha-yoredet hilamata, that the soul of the animal strives only for lowly, earthly, mundane, material things. However, the soul of the human being, nefesh ha-adam, ha'ola lamala, constantly strives for things which are above it. However, as a result of a human being eating the soul of an animal, it's likely that the human being will take into itself some of the characteristics of the animal. So therefore, instead of being able to move upwards as a human being should, it moves downwards into the realm of the animal, because after all, the Ramban is saying, we are what we eat. And by consuming the soul of the animal, which is of lowly status, we bring ourselves low as well. It's interesting to note that the Ramban uses a similar explanation when he tells us why it is forbidden to eat non-kosher animals. Non-kosher animals, as a rule, the Ramban explains, are carnivorous. They eat other animals, and therefore by eating carnivorous animals we bring a certain amount of cruelty. We imbibe a certain amount of cruelty into ourselves. So therefore, to sum up, what the Ramban is in fact explaining the Torah to mean is that you're not allowed to eat the blood. The blood belongs to God. Why does it belong to God? Because it's the soul. You're only allowed to use it for soulful reasons, to atone for your soul. You're not allowed to use it for mundane reasons, merely to be able to eat when you could just as well survive on other food. Another reason the Ramban explains that it's forbidden is because the animal represents that which is low, and its soul is constantly moving downwards for mere mundane material things. A human being, however, needs to strive for that which is above. By imbibing the animal soul, a person imbibes some of this characteristic of the animal, and instead of striving for above, it will taint him and will bring him down low. Point out in this regard that another one of the commentaries, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Reb Chaim ben Attar, a very famous Sephardic commentary, explains something similar. He says that the human being is connected to God Almighty, and as a result of imbibing blood, he separates himself from God Almighty. And this is the reason why the Torah says that as a result of eating blood, you will be cut off. Not so much as a punishment, but rather as a result of making yourself animalistic. You cannot be animalistic and godly at the same time. And therefore, by pursuing the blood of the animal, the soul of the animal, mundane material things, you automatically remove yourself from God Almighty.